Hercule Poirot and the Case of the Bookbinder's Secret. Dear friends, welcome to tonight's Hercule Poirot story. I'm Sam, your host, and it's a true pleasure to have you with me for another cozy mystery. Before we begin, I'd love to know a little about you. What do you do, or what did you do before retiring? Perhaps you're a teacher, a baker, a gardener, or something completely unique. Share it in the comments below. I always enjoy learning about our wonderful community of listeners. Now, make yourself comfortable, settle in with something warm to drink, and let's begin tonight's tale. Chapter 1. The Whispering Pages. The rain had begun before dawn, a steady London drizzle that seemed determined to blur the edges of the waking city. Beyond the window of his apartment at Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot observed the grey streets through a faint mist of condensation. Umbrellas moved like dark petals opening and closing below, while the rhythmic clatter of hooves echoed faintly from Charing Cross Road. To most, it was a dreary morning. To Poirot, it was a symphony of order, every drop, every motion falling precisely as it must. On his small breakfast table, the silver cutlery gleamed. The eggs were soft-boiled exactly 3 minutes, the toast golden and unbroken. His napkin, folded to perfection, rested beside a cup of coffee that steamed gently in the muted light. Order, he often reminded himself, was the essence of happiness, and happiness the proper state of the civilized mind. He had just reached for the morning paper when a knock interrupted his serenity. Poirot raised an eyebrow, sighing with a mixture of curiosity and resignation. Only one man, he mused, would call at such an hour without appointment. "Come in, mon ami," he said softly. The door opened to reveal Inspector Japp, shoulders dusted with rain, his overcoat heavy and dark from the weather. His expression bore the mixture of fatigue and excitement that accompanied any puzzle worth solving. "Morning, Poirot," he said, removing his hat and shaking the rain from it. "Sorry to disturb your breakfast, but I've a queer one for you. Thought it might tempt those little grey cells of yours." Poirot gestured gracefully to the armchair opposite. "For you, my dear Japp, the door is always open, though perhaps next time you will allow me to finish my toast first." His eyes twinkled as he spoke. "Now what is this queer one, as you call it?" Japp settled into the chair, stretching his hands toward the fire. "Name's Henry Armitage. Old fellow, wealthy collector of rare books. Found dead this morning in his private library. Heart gave out, so it seems. But there's something odd. His housekeeper says the smell in the room wasn't right. Some kind of glue or chemical. And there's a book on his desk, half rebound, half torn to bits. The doctor says it's a natural death, but I'm not so sure." Poirot tilted his head, intrigued. "Glue, you say? And parchment?" "That's right. Mon cher Japp, you know well. When a man of age dies suddenly, the world is quick to call it natural. But death," he murmured, leaning back, "is not always so considerate." He rose from his chair and crossed to the window, watching the rivulets of rain trail down the glass. "Tell me this, Mr. Armitage. What sort of collector was he?" "First editions, mostly. Old bindings, rare prints. Bit of a recluse, they say. Lived alone in a townhouse near Bloomsbury. The servants came in mornings. Last night he was seen alive, reading by the fire." Poirot nodded slowly. "Ah, books. They are like people, n'est-ce pas?" "Some are bound in truth, others in deception. And both, when opened carelessly, can cause trouble," Japp chuckled. "Only you could make a murder sound like a library tour." "Will you come have a look?" Poirot turned from the window. His expression was serene, but the spark behind his eyes betrayed the stirrings of curiosity. "Mais oui. It is not every day that death and literature share the same binding. Give me half an hour to arrange my tie, and I am yours." As Japp left to fetch the car, Poirot lingered by the window once more. The city below seemed quieter now, the rain softening its pulse. Somewhere, within a library scented of leather and dust, a story had ended, but perhaps not completely. He smiled faintly to himself, for some pages, he knew, never stay closed. Fleet Street was quieter than usual that morning, the fog still lingering like pale smoke drifting between chimneys. As Poirot and Inspector Japp stepped from the cab, the faint tang of rain mixed with the deeper scent of ink and paper that seemed to belong to the street itself. Between a tobacconist and an old print shop stood a narrow doorway with faded gold letters on glass, Tolliver's bindery. A small brass bell tinkled as Poirot pushed the door open. Inside, the world seemed to shrink into muted light and shadow. Dust motes drifted lazily through a single shaft of sunlight that fell upon a wooden workbench littered with fine tools, scraps of leather, and neatly wound spools of thread. Shelves rose high against the walls, stacked with tomes in every stage of rebirth, some stripped of their covers, others gleaming with fresh polish. The air was thick with the comforting, almost sacred aroma of glue, parchment, and time. Behind the counter stood a man of slight build, his spectacles sliding precariously down a thin nose. His hands, ink-stained and trembling slightly, were at work pressing the spine of a newly bound volume. He looked up at the visitors with the faint hesitation of a man accustomed to solitude. "Mr. Edmund Tolliver?" Japp asked, showing his badge. "Yes, that's right," the man replied, his voice quiet but precise, like the snip of thread. "May I help you, gentlemen?" Poirot advanced a step, his gaze travelling fondly over the rows of tools. "Such care, such artistry," he said warmly. "To bind a book, it is not merely a trade, it is to give form to memory. You, monsieur, are a craftsman of the soul." Tolliver blinked, uncertain how to receive the compliment.
"I try to be thorough," he murmured.
"I've done work for collectors, libraries, the occasional scholar. Nothing extraordinary." Japp cleared his throat. "Including Mr. Henry Armitage, I believe." The bookbinder froze for the briefest instant before nodding. "Yes, Mr. Armitage brought me several pieces over the years.
Antiquarian bindings, mostly."
The last one, a volume of poetry, if I recall, he left it here last month for restoration." Poirot's eyes drifted to a nearby shelf, where a half-bound book lay open, its spine exposed, delicate stitching gleaming like veins. He reached out, fingertips brushing the edge. "May I?" Tolliver hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Poirot examined the book with a jeweller's delicacy. His eyes narrowed slightly. Between the layers of paper and glue, a faint shimmer caught the light. The lining of the spine glinted faintly gold.
"Curious," he murmured.
"Such decoration is unusual, no? Gold leaf inside the binding where no one will ever see?" The bookbinder's hand tightened around his tools. "A client's request, perhaps," he said too quickly.
"Some collectors like hidden flourishes." Poirot looked up.
"Or hidden compartments," he said gently. "You see, the inner lining, it bears the marks of pressure, as though something once rested within it." The silence stretched. The only sound was the faint tick of a clock somewhere behind the shelves. Tolliver swallowed. His pale eyes darted toward the door, then back to Poirot. "I know nothing of that," he whispered. Poirot tilted his head, his tone soft but piercing. "Monsieur, when one works with such precision, one notices what is missing as much as what remains. Something was placed in this spine and later taken away. Did Mr. Armitage retrieve it?" Tolliver's voice trembled.
He said it was safer here."
"But 2 nights before his death, a man came asking for the same book. I refused him. The next morning, the lock on my door was broken." Poirot's gaze deepened. "And what was it that Mr. Armitage wished to keep hidden?" The bookbinder looked down at his ink-stained fingers, his voice barely audible. "Whatever it was, sir, it frightened him. And now I believe it's gone for good." Poirot replaced the book gently on the counter. "No, monsieur," he said softly. "Nothing truly hidden is ever gone. It merely waits between the pages." Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the street in quiet grey. Japp gave a low whistle as they stepped back into the cold air. "He's hiding something, that one." Poirot nodded, eyes distant. "But of course, even the most beautiful bindings conceal their flaws, mon ami. The question is what truth was worth sealing in gold." Chapter 2. Ink, Glue and Lies. The Armitage townhouse stood like a relic of another century, a place where time had gathered dust on its own reflection. The building loomed quietly on the corner of Russell Square, its tall windows veiled with lace, its doorway framed by ivy that had long since turned to brittle brown. When Hercule Poirot stepped from the cab, he felt that particular stillness that clings to old houses, a hush composed not of peace, but of secrets withheld. Inside, the air carried the faint perfume of old leather and polished mahogany. The corridor stretched before him, lined with portraits of scholars and authors, their painted eyes fixed on some eternal thought. Books overflowed from glass-fronted cabinets, their spines gleaming with gold filigree and Latin inscriptions. The faint creak of floorboards beneath Poirot's immaculate shoes was the only sign of movement. A young woman appeared at the far end of the hall. She moved with quiet precision, her gloved hands clasped before her. "Monsieur Poirot?" she asked softly. "I am Clara Armitage." Poirot bowed his head. "Mademoiselle, it is an honor. Your uncle was, I hear, a great lover of the printed word." Her smile was polite, but her eyes betrayed fatigue. He lived for his books, yes. They were his world, and perhaps his prison. She led him into a spacious study. It was a beautiful room, high ceilings, a fire low in the grate. The scent of damp paper mingled with smoke. The desk stood at the center, still littered with notes and a magnifying lens. Across its surface lay open volumes and loose leaves, as if the master of the house might return at any moment to resume his reading. But the chair was empty, and a thin layer of dust had begun to form where his hands once rested. Poirot's eyes lingered on the walls. Every shelf was precise yet not quite symmetrical. One volume out of place, a small detail only he would notice. His gaze settled on a leather-bound ledger resting slightly askew. He stepped closer, tilting his head. Clara watched him carefully. Uncle kept records of every acquisition. He was meticulous to a fault. He'd often say, "A book is like a confession.
It must be recorded to be redeemed." Poirot ran a delicate finger along. "A philosophy most interesting, though I fear this confession is incomplete." He opened it slowly.
The entries were written in an elegant hand, each line a catalogue of treasures, incunabula, first editions, private manuscripts. Then abruptly a gap, a page torn cleanly from the binding. Poirot studied the ragged edge, the faint residue of glue. "You see, mademoiselle, the page has been removed with care, but not by a professional hand."
"It was done in haste," Clara's breath caught. I didn't notice. I haven't touched his things since the inspector came." Poirot turned his gaze to her.
"You said your uncle was fearful in his last days?" She nodded, clasping her hands tighter.
"Yes, he spoke of a poem, an obscure one, I think."
"He said the words were dangerous, that the book containing them should never have been opened."
"I thought it was his nerves."
He had grown forgetful, anxious. But the night before he died, he locked himself in this room. I heard him pacing until dawn." Poirot bent closer to the torn page, his expression thoughtful. "You believe he feared a curse, mademoiselle?" She hesitated. He believed words have power, and perhaps he was right. "The night he died, I found the lamp still burning, and a page, only one, placed face down beside his chair.
I threw it into the fire before the police came."
I was frightened of what it might say." Poirot looked at her steadily, his tone kind but firm. "You destroyed a clue, mademoiselle, but not the truth. It remains, somewhere in the silence of these walls." She turned away, her voice trembling. "He was a good man, Monsieur Poirot. Whatever he did, he thought it was to protect someone." Poirot replaced the ledger gently. "Perhaps, yes. But to protect is often to conceal. And concealment, it is merely truth in disguise." As he left the study, his keen eyes passed once more over the shelves. Somewhere amid those bindings, between the glue and gilt, a single story lay missing, torn not by chance, but by conscience. Evening descended over Whitehaven mansions like a velvet curtain drawn across the stage of the city. The rain, steady since dawn, had softened into a whisper against the window panes. Inside, Hercule Poirot's apartment glowed with orderly warmth, the gentle ticking of the clock, the faint aroma of bergamot tea and the small, steady flame of the gas lamp that lit his writing desk. On the desk, lay a neat arrangement of items from the day's inquiries, a notebook filled with observations, the corner of a torn ledger page from Mr. Armitage's study, and a scrap of binding cloth retrieved from the late collector's desk. Every detail had been examined, catalogued, and aligned. The symmetry comforted Poirot. It allowed the little grey cells to think with clarity. He sat in his armchair, fingertips pressed together, eyes half closed. "Order, Georges," he murmured, "is the soul of truth. When the pattern is disturbed, it is because something wishes to remain unseen." His valet, Georges, was accustomed to these pronouncements. With quiet efficiency, he placed a small tray beside Poirot, a silver teapot, a single biscuit, and a folded evening paper. "Will you dine later, monsieur?" "In good time, perhaps. For now, we nourish only the intellect." Poirot's eyes flickered toward the window, where the city's gaslights shimmered faintly through the rain. "Tell me, Georges, you recall the workshop we visited this morning?" "The smell?" Georges blinked. "The smell, sir?"
Yes, yes.
"The odour, mon ami." It was peculiar, was it not?
A tang of something acrid beneath the leather and the glue.
"That, I think, is where the mystery breathes," Georges frowned thoughtfully. "It did seem unusually sharp, sir. Industrial, perhaps? Just so. The ordinary bookbinder's glue, it has the scent of starch, of gentleness. But this was the smell of manufacture, of something made not for books, but for preservation." Poirot leaned forward, his voice softening.
"There is a purpose behind every fragrance."
"The murderer, he leaves not only fingerprints, but perfumes of intent." He opened his notebook and, with neat, deliberate strokes, wrote, "Odour, synthetic, perhaps resinous or chemical."
"Origin Fleet Street?"
Then, with a small smile, "Georges, tomorrow you shall take a little walk.
"Visit the workshops along Fleet Street."
Make polite inquiries. Ask for samples of glue, pastes, varnishes, anything they use to preserve bindings.
"And of course take notes." "Ah,
And do not forget to be charming." Georges gave a mild bow.
naturally, monsieur."
"I shall charm the glue makers of London into confession." Poirot chuckled softly. "Très bien. It is perhaps not so romantic as catching a jewel thief, but who can say? The smallest scent, the faintest stain, they are the true poems of crime." When Georges had gone, Poirot remained seated before the window. Beyond the glass, the city flickered like an old photograph. Black umbrellas crossing the street, lamps glowing through the mist, carriages rattling faintly in the distance. He could see his own reflection, staring back at him, the face of a man more concerned than he cared to admit. He spoke softly to the empty room. A man binds his secrets as he binds his books. He glues them between pages, thinking they will remain safe. But time is the great solvent. It loosens every bond. His gaze drifted toward the scrap of cloth again. It was small, unremarkable, yet when he turned it beneath the lamplight, a faint shimmer appeared. Tiny flecks of gold, invisible unless one looked closely. Gold leaf, perhaps, or the remnant of some hidden emblem. Poirot lifted it delicately with tweezers, examining the edges. "Gold in the glue," he murmured.
"A symbol of wealth?"
Or perhaps of preservation. What secret indeed could be worth binding in silence for decades? Outside, the bells of St. Martin's tolled the hour. Poirot rose, extinguished the lamp, and stood for a long moment by the window. The rain had ceased, and the night had taken on that peculiar stillness that comes when London holds its breath. Somewhere in the city, someone else was awake, guarding their secret, fearing discovery. Poirot's reflection in the glass seemed to nod in agreement with his thoughts. He smiled faintly.
"Patience, mon ami," he told himself.
Even the tightest binding yields to the truth in the end. And with that, Hercule Poirot returned to his desk, his mind already tracing the invisible threads that bound ink, glue and lies together into one intricate design. Chapter 3. The Gold Leaf Cipher. The morning light broke through London's clouds like pale silk, brushing the city's rooftops in muted gold. At Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat very still, his gaze fixed on a sheet of laboratory notes spread before him. Every word was neatly underlined in blue ink, every observation ordered to perfection. Across the page, a single detail gleamed like a revelation. Trace of gold leaf fused with ink residue. Presence of writing beneath gilded layer. Poirot's eyes glinted. "Voilà," he murmured. "Not ornamentation, concealment." He rose, smoothing the crease from his waistcoat, and reached for his hat. "Georges, the little bindery on Fleet."
Street. Once more we shall disturb peace. The streets were still.
Slick from the night's rain as he and Inspector Japp stepped into the narrow lane that led to Tolliver's bindery. The sign above the door was small and faded, the paint cracked like old parchment. Inside, the familiar scent of leather and paste met them, though today, Poirot noticed, it carried a sharper note, as though tension itself had seeped into the air. Edmund Tolliver stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled, spectacles fogged with nervous sweat. He looked smaller in daylight, not merely from age, but from the burden of secrets poorly kept. "Ah, Monsieur Tolliver," Poirot greeted pleasantly. "We intrude once again. You must forgive the persistence of a mind that refuses disorder." Tolliver swallowed. If it's about Mr. Armitage, I've said all I know."
I repair his books.
"That's all." Poirot moved closer to the workbench, fingertips grazing a stack of ledgers bound in dull brown cloth. "And yet, my friend, books do not repair themselves, nor do they acquire gold dust unless one intends it." He paused, eyes drifting over the tools, awl, needle, press, glue pot, then to the open ledger beside them. The pages were lined in two distinct hands.
One elegant upright.
The other rushed, uneven, almost trembling. Japp noticed it too. "You keep partners now, Mr. Tolliver?" Tolliver's jaw tightened. "No, sir. I work alone." "Then perhaps," Poirot said gently, "you sometimes receive—"
"Assistance."
The man hesitated. His gaze darted to the far corner, where a small safe stood half-hidden beneath a tarp. Poirot followed the glance but did not move toward it. "You see," he continued softly, "the glue you used on Mr. Armitage's book was not of the ordinary kind. It bore traces of an industrial compound, one used in the sealing of archival documents."
"Rarely for restoration, but often for preservation of a different nature." Tolliver's breathing quickened. I don't know what you mean. Mais non, monsieur."
"You know precisely." Poirot's voice remained kind, yet carried the weight of truth. "The gold leaf we discovered bore ink beneath it, faint, secret writing. Someone bound a message into that book and someone else took it out." The silence that followed was taut as string. Then, slowly, Tolliver wiped his palms on his apron and spoke.
I don't know who they were."
"They sent the volumes by courier, always wrapped in brown paper, no return address. Payment came the same way. Sovereigns wrapped in old newspaper. The only instruction was repair and reseal exactly as received." "And you obeyed," Japp said grimly. Tolliver nodded.
"A craftsman doesn't ask questions, Inspector."
"We mend what's broken. We don't read between the pages." Poirot studied the man's trembling hands, hands that once stitched beauty, now shaking under guilt. "And yet," he said softly, "even the most loyal craftsman feels the weight of his work. The gold that bound these pages, Monsieur Tolliver, it did more than decorate."
"It gilded a lie." Tolliver's eyes flicked up, wet and desperate. "I didn't kill him, monsieur. I swear it." Poirot inclined his head.
"Perhaps not. But the truth you helped to preserve, it may yet kill someone else." Outside, the wind rattled the shop sign, its faint creak echoing like a sigh. Poirot turned toward the door, drawing his coat close.
"Come, Japp," he murmured.
"The little workshop has spoken enough for today." As they stepped into the pale afternoon light, Japp glanced sideways. "You believe him?" Poirot smiled faintly.
"I believe he tells the truth, my dear, and as far as his conscience allows."
"But truth, mon ami, is much like a book. Some pages are missing, some are sealed. One must read between the gold." And with that, they vanished into the drifting fog, leaving behind the faint scent of parchment and the echo of a secret too long bound. The London Bibliophiles Club was a sanctuary of quiet voices and the faint perfume of polished oak. Shelves of first editions lined the panelled walls, their spines catching the amber glow of the gas lamp. A hush lay over the room, broken only by the occasional chime of a teaspoon against porcelain. Poirot, immaculate as ever in a charcoal suit and silver teapot, sat at a corner table beside Inspector Japp. Before them, a pot of Darjeeling steamed gently, filling the air with its floral calm. "You know, Poirot," Japp muttered, stirring his tea, "I'll never understand this lot."
"Half of London's wealth locked away in books nobody reads." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon ami."
That is the English soul, sentimental, proud, and curiously fond of dust. He glanced around the room, noting the small clusters of scholars in tweed jackets, their conversations wrapped in civility and secrecy alike. "But observe, Japp, here even whispers are valuable commodities." At the far table, two elderly gentlemen leaned over a stack of auction catalogues, voices low and urgent. A few phrases carried across the silence: Armitage Collection, Unpublished Confession, Royal Scandal. Poirot tilted his head. "Do my ears deceive me?" he murmured. "Or have we just overheard the ghost of history trying to sell itself?" One of the club stewards, recognizing Poirot, approached with a deferential bow. "Monsieur Poirot, a pleasure. Your usual blend?" "Merci, no. Today, only curiosity." Poirot's tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. "Tell me, my good man, have the members been much excited by Mr. Armitage's affairs of late?" The steward hesitated, then leaned in discreetly. "Quite so, sir. There's talk that the late Mr. Armitage intended to auction something delicate. A manuscript, they say, 17th century, private correspondence of a royal household. Some claim it could have altered history." Poirot's eyebrow arched. "And yet it was never listed publicly?" "No, sir. Withdrawn before announcement. The matter caused rather a stir." "Indeed." Poirot exchanged a glance with Japp. "You see, mon ami, truth, like fine tea, is often kept under lock and key. Exposed too quickly, it becomes bitter." They lingered as the afternoon light softened through the tall windows, gilding the room in melancholy warmth. Poirot's gaze travelled idly across the members, readers, collectors, dreamers, each sipping their tea with reverence, until it halted. Near the door, a familiar figure appeared. Clara Armitage, dressed in mourning grey, her posture graceful, yet tense. She did not see him. Her gloved hand clutched a small parcel as she spoke quietly to a man in a brown felt hat, his features obscured by the brim. Together they slipped out through a side corridor reserved for private guests. Poirot did not move. His spoon rested untouched beside his cup, the silver catching a glint of lamplight. "Something wrong?" Japp asked, noticing the sudden stillness. "Only an observation, my friend," Poirot said softly.
"Mademoiselle Clara has found company more comforting than grief." Japp frowned.
"You think she's involved?" Poirot's lips curved into a thoughtful smile. "Involved, yes. Guilty, perhaps not. Guilt is rarely so elegantly dressed." He rose, brushing an invisible speck of dust from his sleeve.
"We have learned much."
The deceased planned to part with a royal confession, a secret bound by history itself. If such a manuscript exists, it is more than paper and ink. It is power. And where there is power, there is fear. They stepped out into the early evening mist. Fleet Street shimmered with the glow of gas lamps, carriages clattering past puddles of gold reflection. Somewhere in that labyrinth of streets, the truth waited, folded between greed and loyalty, between love and deceit. Poirot paused beneath a street lamp, adjusting his hat against the drizzle. "You see, Japp," he murmured, "not all who cherish books love the truth they tell. Some collect them to silence the stories they dare not hear." As the club doors closed behind them, the muffled murmur of scholars faded into the fog, replaced by the steady rhythm of London's rain, soft, persistent, and secretive, like the turning of a page. Chapter 4. Shadows in Leather. The rain had not stopped since afternoon. It fell in a fine, ceaseless drizzle, turning the streets into ribbons of reflected lamplight. Inside Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat at his writing desk, the rhythmic ticking of the clock harmonizing with the patter of rain against the window. All was in order. His supper tray cleared, his notes arranged, his thoughts quietly circling the mystery like a moth around a candle flame. Then came the knock. Not the crisp rap of a caller at decent hours, but a hesitant, hurried tapping, the sound of someone uncertain whether they wished to be heard. Poirot's brows lifted. "It is late for visitors," he murmured. And yet curiosity keeps strange company. He opened the door to find Edmund Tolliver, drenched and shaking, his cap crushed in one hand. His eyes darted down the corridor, as though the walls themselves might be listening. "Monsieur Poirot," he stammered, "I shouldn't have come."
"But I've nowhere else." Poirot ushered him in gently, guiding him toward the hearth where a small fire glowed. "Sit, my good man.
Warm yourself. And when your hands cease their trembling, you may tell me what ghosts trouble you." For a moment, Tolliver said nothing. The firelight caught his face, hollowed by worry, his fingers twitching as though still threading invisible needles. "It's the book," he whispered at last. "The one from Mr. Armitage's study. It wasn't a collector's piece at all."
"It was a vessel, a hiding place." Poirot watched him intently, offering no interruption. "I was paid," Tolliver went on, "to rebind a set of letters, real old things written on lambskin parchment, the ink near faded."
They were from a noble household back in the last century.
"Love letters," I thought, or confessions of some sort.
I didn't read them, not properly, but I saw the seals, the royal crest. He swallowed hard. They weren't meant to be seen again, not by anyone. Poirot's voice softened.
"And yet someone wanted them restored."
"Yes," Tolliver said.
"And hidden again. That's what the gold leaf was for, and not decoration but concealment." A second skin over the truth. The rain outside grew heavier, blurring the city lights into streaks of silver.
Poirot rose, walking to the window.
"And the patron, the one who commissioned this?"
Tolliver hesitated.
I daren't speak their name."
"You don't understand, monsieur. These are powerful people. They can make a man disappear with a word." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "And yet you have come to me when silence would be safer."
"You are a brave man or a desperate one." A sudden sound bit, the crunch of carriage wheels stopping on wet cobblestone.
Tolliver flinched, his head snapping toward the window. In the yellow fog, a dark figure stepped down from the carriage and looked up toward Poirot's apartment. "No," Tolliver whispered, backing away. "They've found me." Poirot moved swiftly to the door. "Monsieur, remain calm."
"We will," but Tolliver was already gone.
In one trembling motion, he seized his cap, bolted down the corridor, and vanished into the stairwell. By the time Poirot reached the window again, only the mist remained, swirling around the street lamp like smoke over dying embers. On the rug lay a single scrap of paper. Poirot bent to pick it up.
Its edge gleamed faintly in the firelight, gilded, delicate, torn from something larger.
Upon it, the faint trace of ink curved like the end of an unfinished word. Poirot turned it over in his hand, his expression unreadable. "A confession," he murmured, left unfinished, as though time itself had interrupted the sentence. He placed the fragment carefully upon his desk, beside his teacup and fountain pen, as if it were a relic from another age.
Outside, the carriage wheels rolled away into the night,
carrying secrets that refused to rest, bound in silence, yet whispering still. The rain had settled into a steady whisper, a lullaby for the restless city. Within Whitehaven Mansions all was still. Hercule Poirot sat alone at his writing desk, a single lamp casting a soft halo of light upon the papers before him. The world beyond his window was blurred by moisture. London, in half-sleep, half-shadow, dreaming beneath the veil of drizzle. On the table lay his notebook, open to a fresh page. The meticulous order of his handwriting spread across it like measured footsteps. In one column, Armitage, the collector, the man who guarded knowledge like treasure. In another, Tolliver, the craftsman, the reluctant conspirator who stitched deceit into leather and glue. And finally, Clara Armitage, the heir to her uncle's estate, yet walking in secrecy with a stranger through the side door of the club. 3 names, 3 lives bound, as if by invisible thread, to a single volume that should never have existed. Poirot's pen tapped softly against the inkwell. He leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the city's rhythm, the distant clip of a horse's hooves, the faint hum of a late tram, the soft toll of a church bell somewhere across the river. All of it wove into the quiet heartbeat of London. It soothed him, even as his mind remained perfectly alert. He began to sketch connections, thin lines of logic crossing the page. Monsieur Armitage fears exposure, he murmured to himself. Mademoiselle Clara inherits silence. Monsieur Tolliver restores what should remain hidden. And yet, who benefits from the book's disappearance? His gaze drifted to the small scrap Tolliver had left behind. Under lamplight, the gilded edge gleamed faintly, almost alive. He traced it gently with one fingertip. The ink was faint, but not gone. A few more letters. The ghost of a word. Poirot reached for a magnifying glass, studying it with the reverence of a scholar deciphering ancient text. The strokes were deliberate, elegant, a hand trained in careful secrecy. He felt the pulse of the mystery throb softly beneath the gold. Somewhere, perhaps hidden in another volume or behind another lock, the rest of the confession still existed. He replaced the fragment carefully, aligning it squarely with the corner of his notes. Every object on the desk stood in precise symmetry: the lamp, the teacup, the penknife, the paperweight. To Poirot, order was comfort, a bulwark against chaos. Yet tonight, even perfect alignment could not still the unease that hovered in the air. Outside, thunder murmured far away, low and thoughtful. Poirot rose, moving to the window. The street below shimmered under gaslight, rain glistening on the cobbles like liquid glass. Somewhere, someone watched, waited, or perhaps regretted. The city itself seemed to breathe with secrets. He turned back toward his desk, extinguished the lamp, and stood in silence for a long moment, his silhouette framed by the window's faint glow. "When truth sleeps beneath ink and glue," he whispered, "even silence may bleed." And as the final bell of midnight drifted across the rooftops, Poirot remained awake, the night's quiet guardian of unspoken sins, waiting for dawn to turn the next page. Chapter 5. The manuscript returned. The morning light entered Poirot's sitting room with the hesitance of an unwelcome guest. Outside, London stretched itself awake beneath a veil of pale mist, the clatter of hooves and the distant hum of traffic faintly stirring the quiet. Poirot, immaculate as ever, sat before his breakfast tray, coffee precisely poured, toast evenly buttered, and the post neatly stacked beside the silver pot. Among the usual envelopes, invitations, requests for opinion, and the occasional advertisement for patent shoe polish, one stood apart, thick, cream-coloured and faintly scented with old dust. Its seal was broken, as if it had already lived through more than one pair of hands. Poirot's gaze narrowed. The handwriting on the front was elegant but uncertain, like a voice trembling with remorse. No return address. He opened it with care. Inside lay a single fragment of vellum, its texture rough and ancient. Across it, in faded sepia ink, 2 words only: "Forgive me." For a moment, Poirot sat motionless. Then, holding the fragment to the light, he saw what memory confirmed: faint traces of gold dust along the torn edges, the same residue as on Tolliver's scrap.
A piece of the same book.
A voice, at last, trying to speak from silence. He rose from his chair, already reaching for his hat and gloves. "Georges," he said, as his valet appeared, "we go to the British Library. There is a ghost who wishes to confess, and I must hear its story." The great library stood solemn and still beneath the pale London sky, its echoing halls heavy with the scent of ink and leather. Poirot presented his request with the authority of a man used to secrecy, and was soon escorted to the special collections room, a place where the past slept behind glass. There, Under the quiet hum of the reading lamps, he laid the vellum beside a preserved folio, the biography of Lord C., banned in 1892 for its allusions to royal indiscretions. The edges matched almost perfectly. He leaned closer, the reflection of gold glinting faintly in his eyes. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. The missing chapter. A librarian approached, her voice low with awe.
"That section was believed destroyed, Miss."
"Removed by order of the Crown," Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mademoiselle, nothing truly disappears. It merely hides until conscience grows heavy." He studied the vellum again, the simple plea written upon it.
"Forgive me."
Not a note of apology to the reader, but to history itself. Perhaps Tolliver or Armitage, or another hand entirely. Someone who understood too late that truth, once silenced, stains everything it touches. As he replaced the fragment within its protective sleeve, Poirot felt the faintest tremor of understanding. The mystery was no longer about theft or greed. It was about atonement, a sin bound between pages, returning to be heard. He turned toward the window where pale light filtered through the rain-spotted glass. "A confession," he whispered, "disguised as literature. And somewhere in London, perhaps, another letter waited to be found." The afternoon sky hung low over St. James's Park, its reflection trembling across the surface of the pond like a thought too fragile to speak aloud. Beneath the bare trees, Clara Armitage sat upon a wrought-iron bench, gloved hands clasped tightly around a small parcel. She was dressed in pale grey, a colour that seemed to dissolve into the mist. Hercule Poirot, seated some distance away with a newspaper held discreetly before him, watched with quiet precision. The rain had lessened to a fine drizzle, just enough to blur the edges of the world and to hide tears. A man approached. Brown hat, dark coat. The same figure Poirot had seen leaving the Bibliophiles Club. Clara rose quickly, her breath visible in the damp air. Their exchange was brief but intense, her gestures nervous, pleading, his restrained, professional. At one point she removed her glove to hand over a bundle of letters, wrapped in oilskin and bound with red twine. Poirot caught the faintest shimmer as the man slipped them into his case. Gold, wax seal, crest, royal. After a few minutes, Clara turned away, walking briskly toward them all, her posture fragile with effort. Poirot waited until she vanished from sight before folding his paper and standing. He followed the man at a measured pace, the rhythmic tap of his cane soft against the wet path. When the man paused to light a cigarette beneath a lamppost, Poirot spoke, his voice courteous but firm. "Pardon, monsieur, might one inquire whether your business is of a legal nature?" The man started slightly, studying Poirot's immaculate figure and unmistakable moustache. "If you're from the Yard," he said, "you'll find I've nothing improper to hide. I am a solicitor, name of Harrington. Miss Armitage merely sought advice regarding her inheritance." Poirot tilted his head, eyes bright as clockwork. "Ah, inheritance, you say. Yet you carry documents sealed with the crest of His Majesty's household. Such matters, I think, are not of money, but of discretion." Harrington stiffened.
"You have sharp eyes, sir."
"Perhaps too sharp." Poirot smiled faintly.
"I assure you they are merely attentive."
"Tell me, do you know what is written in those letters?" The solicitor hesitated, then exhaled. "No, nor do I wish to. My client fears they concern events long buried, matters that, if publicized, could ruin more than reputations." Poirot nodded slowly. "Indeed. The past, monsieur. It has a way of binding us, tighter than any spine of leather or thread of glue." As the man departed, Poirot turned his gaze toward the park once more. The bench where Clara had sat was empty now, save for a single fallen glove, pale grey, soaked through. He picked it up delicately as though handling the last trace of innocence. "In protecting one name," he murmured. "Another was damned." The rain began again, gentle and unrelenting, as Poirot slipped the glove into his pocket, a reminder that even mercy has its cost. Chapter 6. The Binding Thread. The morning mist hung low over Fleet Street, veiling the world in shades of pewter and smoke. Poirot stepped out of his cab, adjusting the brim of his hat as he surveyed the narrow row of shuttered shops. The air smelled of damp paper and soot, with a faint metallic tang that clung like memory. Tolliver's bindery stood before him, its door ajar, swaying gently with the draught. Inside, the silence was absolute. It was the kind of silence left behind after struggle, when all that had meaning has been broken. Shelves once lined with leather-bound volumes now lay bare. The floor was littered with torn bindings, splintered wood, and scraps of gilt that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt parchment. Poirot moved slowly, each step measured, his polished shoes making no sound on the layer of ash. A single chair lay overturned beside the work table. Scattered tools gleamed faintly, awls, thread spools, brushes, stiff with glue. His eyes rested on the hearth where grey embers still smouldered. Within them, fragments of parchment curled like autumn leaves, the ink upon them half erased by flame. He stooped, lifting a surviving corner of vellum between his fingertips. The letters were faint, but he could still make out part of a signature. Armitage, mon pauvre Tolliver, Poirot whispered softly, placing the scrap back upon the ashes. You wished to bind secrets, yet you were bound yourself, by fear. Something caught his eye beneath the edge of the hearth rug, a glint of gold, small and deliberate. He knelt and drew forth a tool, a bookbinder's awl, elegant and fine, its handle engraved with a royal insignia. He examined it closely, turning it to the light. The crest was unmistakable, the same symbol embossed upon the letters Clara had passed to the solicitor in St. James's Park. So Tolliver had not lied. He had worked for someone of influence, someone with power enough to silence both guilt and truth. Yet even power leaves its trace. Poirot brushed his thumb across the engraving, and his expression softened. Every craft leaves its signature, he murmured. Even destruction. On the workbench lay a single unburnt volume, its cover half-sewn, the spine unfinished. The pages were blank, yet the paper bore faint indentations, as if words had once been pressed upon it and later scraped away. Poirot took a pencil from his pocket, lightly shading across the surface until the ghost of a sentence emerged. The confession must never be read. He stood still for a long moment, the faint rain outside tapping upon the cracked window like a metronome for thought. From the street came the distant clatter of a carriage, a reminder that life continued even where it had just been undone. Poirot replaced the awl carefully upon the table, arranging it parallel to the other tools, his instinct for order undimmed by sorrow. When he turned to leave, he paused at the threshold and looked back once more. The room was no longer merely a workshop. It had become a grave, for books, for craft, for truth. He closed the door gently behind him, the latch clicking like the final stitch in a torn seam. Outside the rain began again, washing soot from the cobblestones, carrying it away into the gutters where all forgotten stories go. Poirot lifted his hat to the wind and murmured, "Even ashes, they tell their tale, if one knows how to listen." Then he stepped into the mist, leaving behind the scent of parchment and the echo of loss. The lamplight in Poirot's apartment glowed softly against the evening fog that pressed like gauze against the window panes. The city murmured below, a carriage wheel turning, a bell tolling faintly from a nearby church. But within the room all was still. Poirot sat before his desk, immaculate as always, every object in perfect alignment. Upon the polished surface lay the artifacts of his inquiry, each one deliberate, each one whispering its part of the story. There was the scrap of vellum marked, "Forgive me," the gilded awl with the royal insignia, the charred fragments from Tolliver's hearth, brittle and black as regret. The glove Clara had dropped in the park, now dried and folded beside a tiny pinch of gold dust. Poirot regarded them as a mosaic of sorrow, the remains of truth's undoing. He leaned forward, fingertips pressed together, eyes half closed. "Order and method," he murmured. "It is always a matter of pattern." From a drawer he withdrew his notes, a ledger of Clara's movements, the timeline of Armitage's final days, the sequence of Tolliver's commissions. Slowly, piece by piece, he began to arrange them upon the desk, forming a geometry of guilt, a thread wound from greed to fear, from confession to silence. The first line pointed to Armitage, the collector who sought to publish a truth best left forgotten. He had obtained letters exposing a royal indiscretion, and he intended in his vanity or his righteousness to make them known. But truth, when gilded by scandal, has its price. Poirot's gaze drifted to the All. Tolliver, the craftsman, had been hired to hide the letters within a book, a secret binding, unseen by all but those who knew where to look. Yet even the finest craft cannot conceal the tremor of a guilty hand. Tolliver had spoken of fear, and now he had vanished, consumed by it. Poirot's pencil traced the next line to Clara. She too was bound to the same secret. Her uncle's guilt had become her inheritance. The letters, the solicitor, the quiet meeting in the park, all spoke of an effort to bury what should never have existed. And then one line more, faint but unmistakable. The payments made to Tolliver, the gold sovereigns wrapped in newsprint, came from an account not belonging to Armitage, nor Clara, but to an intermediary, one connected to the royal household. A name obscured, a signature never written. Poirot sat back, the faintest sigh escaping him. "So," he said softly, "there is always one who profits in silence." The rain began again, brushing lightly against the glass. He looked toward it, thoughtful, as though the answer might be written upon each droplet. Guilt, he reflected, was a most curious substance, invisible at first, then binding tighter with each attempt to conceal it. Like glue upon parchment, it held fast even when time tried to peel it away. He rose and crossed to the mantel, where a small clock ticked in measured rhythm. It was nearly midnight. The pattern had revealed itself, clear, elegant, terrible. Yet still, one figure remained unseen, a hand behind the binding that had sealed so many fates. Poirot adjusted the cuffs of his sleeves, restoring his composure with the precision of ritual. "The little grey cells," he whispered. "They are beginning to speak." Outside, London exhaled its mist into the lamplight, and the detective's reflection shimmered faintly upon the window, calm, solemn, and unyielding. The truth, he knew, was close now, held fast between guilt and gold, and as the clock chimed softly, he smiled, almost sadly. "Guilt, like glue," he murmured, "binds tighter with time." Chapter 7. The Quiet Confession. The tea-room in Kensington was a sanctuary of civility amid the November chill. Light from the tall windows spilled softly across linen-clad tables, where delicate cups gleamed beside polished silver. The air was scented faintly with bergamot and honey, and the quiet murmur of afternoon conversation provided a soothing rhythm beneath the sound of rain against glass. At a corner table, Hercule Poirot sat opposite Clara Armitage. His attire, as immaculate as ever, contrasted with her pale, trembling composure. She looked exhausted, not merely from grief, but from the long weight of concealment. Her gloved hands toyed with the handle of her teacup, unable to be still. Poirot regarded her with quiet kindness.
"Mademoiselle," he began, his tone gentle, "you have endured much."
"I ask only that you allow me to ease your conscience with a little order. Order, you see, brings peace, even to sorrow." Clara's lips parted, but no words came. He continued softly. "Your uncle, Monsieur Armitage, was in possession of certain letters, documents that might have altered the reputation of a most esteemed family. He did not intend to harm, only to reveal. But the truth, mademoiselle, is not always kind." Her eyes filled, her voice breaking in a whisper.
"I found them, Monsieur Poirot. I shouldn't have, but curiosity."
"It's a cruel thing."
"I saw my mother's name in those letters."
"She was young and foolish and loved a man she could never have. My uncle discovered it years later. He meant to publish the story, Not to hurt her memory, but to prove his collection's value. Poirot nodded slowly, allowing silence to cradle her words. I begged Tolliver to destroy them, she went on. He agreed, but he was frightened. Said others had already come asking for them.
I thought it was over de Guille until I saw the man in the brown hat.
He said the crown would ensure my mother's honor remained untouched. If the originals were never found, her breath shuddered, and now Mr. Tolliver is gone. I only wanted to protect her. I never wanted anyone to die. Poirot's expression softened. You wish to preserve love, not deceit. Yet, my dear, once a truth is written, it refuses to burn, even when the paper does. Tears welled in her eyes, sliding silently down her cheeks. And what am I to do, Monsieur Poirot?
I cannot live with what I have done. He reached for his cup, stirring his tea with quiet grace before replying.
You will live, mademoiselle, by understanding this. Guilt and grief are not the same. The burden of truth, I think, is sometimes heavier than guilt itself. But it is still yours to carry with dignity. Clara bowed her head, the weight of confession easing, if only slightly. Around them the tea-room continued its tranquil hum, untouched by the quiet tragedy unfolding in its corner. As Poirot watched the rain drift down the window, he murmured, "Truth confessed is not truth undone." Night had fallen softly over London, the kind of quiet that made the gaslight seem to burn more slowly. The rain had ceased, leaving the streets glazed in silver reflections. Within Poirot's apartment, all was in perfect order. The fire burned low in the grate, its warmth flickering across the gleam of polished brass and porcelain. Poirot sat by the window, his thoughts folded as neatly as the handkerchief in his breast pocket. The hour was late when a knock sounded. 3 measured taps, polite yet deliberate. Poirot glanced toward the clock. Precisely 10. He rose, adjusted his cuffs, and opened the door. A man stood there in uniform, dark navy, the gold trim catching the firelight. His face was expressionless, but his bearing spoke of authority. In his gloved hand he carried a slim envelope sealed with deep red wax, stamped by the royal insignia. "Monsieur Poirot," the man said with formal precision, "on behalf of Her Majesty's household, I bring you thanks and a request. The matter concerning the late Mr. Armitage is to be considered concluded." Poirot regarded him quietly. "Concluded, you say?" His voice was smooth, calm, almost tender.
And what of the truths that still lie unspoken?
The man's gaze did not waver. "Some truths, monsieur, serve no good in the telling. The preservation of peace often requires silence. You understand this, I am sure." Poirot inclined his head ever so slightly.
But of course.
Silence, when chosen with care, may indeed preserve harmony. But one must be certain it is harmony, not hypocrisy, that is thus maintained. A small tension flickered in the visitor's jaw, quickly hidden. "We trust your discretion," he said, setting the envelope upon the table beside the door. "No further inquiries will be necessary."
A stipend will be provided for your
cooperation, Poirot smiled faintly, almost wistfully. "Merci, monsieur. I am as ever a servant of order." The man hesitated, then nodded curtly and withdrew. His footsteps faded into the stairwell, the sound of the outer door closing muffled by the fog. Poirot stood motionless for a long moment, listening to the silence settle once more. He turned back toward the fire. The envelope lay untouched, its seal glinting red and solemn in the lamplight. Slowly he opened a drawer in his desk and withdrew a small scrap of parchment, the surviving fragment of Tolliver's burnt manuscript. Upon it a single word remained visible beneath a trace of gold leaf: "Remembrance." Poirot studied it as though it were a relic of conscience itself. The faint ink shimmered, fragile yet defiant.
He murmured, "they wish the case to be closed."
But how can one close what still breathes? He folded the parchment carefully and slipped it into a small envelope of his own, placing it inside a book on the shelf, a volume of poetry, worn from years of thought. "For the sake of discretion," he said softly, "but not for the loss of truth." The fire crackled, its light dimming. Poirot poured himself a final cup of tisane and sat again by the window. Beyond the glass, London's lamps glowed through the mist like distant stars. Somewhere, a carriage passed, its wheels whispering against the wet cobblestones. He sipped slowly, reflecting not on justice denied, but on balance, the delicate art of knowing when to speak, and when silence itself must serve as the final word. Justice unspoken, he whispered, still whispers in the quiet mind. And as the clock struck 11, Poirot closed his eyes, serene and certain that even truth, when buried, leaves behind its scent, faint,
like glue and parchment, but eternal.
Chapter 8. The Last Page. A week had passed since the final visitor, and London, in its timeless way, had resumed its rhythm, carriages rolling over damp cobblestones, the low murmur of traders at Covent Garden, the soft sigh of the Thames under a pale winter sky. The fog no longer seemed ominous, but familiar, like an old companion returning after sorrow has softened. Life, as it always does, had turned its page. At Tolliver's bindery the shutters were open once more. The air inside carried the scent of varnish and fresh leather, though faint traces of smoke still clung to the beams. A young apprentice now tended the benches, a quiet boy with careful hands and an expression of awe as he touched the tools once belonging to the late master. He worked slowly, reverently, as if honouring the ghosts that lingered in the grain of the wood. From the street, Poirot paused to glance in. He did not enter. There was no need. Some places healed best when left to silence. His eyes lingered on the glint of gold leaf catching in the light, and he felt, with quiet certainty, that the craft, like truth, would endure. By afternoon, he was back in his apartment on Whitehaven Mansions. The fire burned steady in the grate, casting a soft, amber glow across the neatly ordered room. A small parcel rested upon the table, wrapped in cream paper and tied with a simple ribbon. Beside it, a note in elegant handwriting read, "For Monsieur Poirot, with gratitude and peace. Clara Armitage." He untied the ribbon with delicate precision as though the gesture itself demanded ceremony. Inside lay a beautifully bound book, the leather supple, the corners gilded, the spine embossed with restrained elegance. He admired the craftsmanship, noting the subtle, symmetrical lines. "Ah," he murmured approvingly, "a fine piece of work and perhaps a new beginning." He opened it to the first page. There, in graceful handwriting, was a simple inscription, "To order and to mercy." For a long moment, Poirot did not move. The words rested upon him like sunlight after a storm, gentle, unassuming, yet profoundly human. He thought of Clara's trembling confession, of Tolliver's fear, of Armitage's ambition, and of the quiet man who came bearing silence on behalf of a throne. Each had played their part in the pattern, each bound by threads unseen, and yet, in the end, order had returned.
As it must, he reached for a small trimming knife and,
with his usual care, smoothed the edge of the book. The motion was almost meditative, a restoration of balance through ritual. "Perfection," he whispered softly, "exists not in purity but in harmony." The firelight shimmered across his polished shoes and the brass buttons of his waistcoat. Outside, the bells of Kensington chimed the hour. He closed the book gently and set it upon the mantel beside the single orchid that stood in its porcelain vase. In that stillness, he allowed himself a smile, faint but sincere. The little grey cells were at rest. The world, though imperfect, had regained its symmetry. Somewhere beyond the city, secrets lay buried, but for tonight London slept peacefully, its sins tucked neatly between the pages of history. Poirot leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, and whispered to the quiet room. Every mystery, like every life, must end, not with answers, but with understanding. The clock ticked once, twice, and then the fire sighed softly, its embers glowing like the last thoughts before sleep. And so, with order restored, Hercule Poirot turned the final page and let the night close gently around him. The rain had returned to London. It fell in fine silvery threads against the window panes of Whitehaven mansions, each drop a quiet percussion in the rhythm of night. Poirot sat at his desk, the lamp beside him burning with steady golden light. Before him lay a single object, a fragment of vellum, edges faintly gilded, words nearly erased by time. He turned it gently, his gloved fingers tracing the faint inscription that had survived flame and deceit. The parchment seemed almost to breathe in the stillness, fragile yet defiant, a relic of confession, of ambition, of guilt. Poirot studied it as one might a portrait of an old friend, not for what it revealed, but for what it chose to conceal. At length, he opened the drawer of his private archive, a collection unseen by the world, filled not with trophies of triumph, but with remnants of the unresolved. Inside rested envelopes marked in his elegant hand, the affair at Marbury Grange, the case of the silent typewriter, La Rose de Minuit. Each represented a truth too delicate to expose, too human to parade. He slipped the fragment into a new folder, labelled it with quiet precision, Le Secret du Relieur, the bookbinder's secret. The ink dried slowly on the paper, its scent mingling with the faint aroma of polished wood and rain. Poirot regarded the label for a moment, then placed the folder neatly between two others, aligning their spines until the row was perfectly even.
Order restored even in secrecy. He sat back, hands folded, eyes half closed in thought.
Some truths, he reflected, were never meant for the public eye. They existed to remind the heart, not to satisfy curiosity. The world, with all its frailties and pride, was not always ready for honesty unvarnished. His gaze wandered to the hearth, where the fire had dwindled to embers. The soft hiss of rain filled the room, steady and rhythmic, like the turning of pages in an unseen book. In its cadence he found comfort. For what was justice, if not the quiet preservation of balance? And what was peace, if not the acceptance that not all endings must be spoken aloud? He reached for his tea, now gone cold, and smiled faintly. The case was finished, though not all was said. The world would go on believing the tale it could bear, and he, Hercule Poirot, would keep the rest, bound not by glue, but by conscience. Outside, the city shimmered beneath the rain. The lamps glowed through the mist like watchful eyes. Somewhere, a carriage rolled past, its wheels whispering over wet stone, a sound that might have been a lullaby. Poirot leaned back, his reflection caught faintly in the darkened glass. "The last secret," he murmured softly, "is peace itself." The words dissolved into the quiet. The rain continued, patient and eternal, as the detective closed his eyes, and the night, like a well-bound book, folded neatly around him.